We're naturally driven to do our best. We're driven to compete with each other and driven to support one another as well. But as men, we look at, we're working these 40-hour weeks, we're trying to make money, support our family, but we also want things, right? We want to be better. We want to be this certain type of person. And so in that escape from reality, we see what our life could look like.
Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode. My name's Devin. Thanks so much for joining me. I hope you're having a wonderful day. In this episode, I had the opportunity to sit down with a good friend and former classmate of mine, JJ. JJ currently works as a mental health counselor, and so you can guess what we talked about, which is mental health. However, we decided to focus the conversation in on men's mental health. And we talked about the stigmas that men face in receiving mental health help, and also some practical solutions that men can implement or try to work on to improve their mental well-being. We also spoke about Brainspotting, which is a technique for reprocessing stored memories, essentially. And it was a phenomenal talk, and I am very, very, very interested in learning more about Brainspotting because it just sounds so different and so practical. And so I hope that the conversation is very interesting, and if you'd like to leave a comment down below, just with a question or with a general statement, I will shout it out on the next episode. I'll pick one, and I will shout it out in the next episode. And so, I started that last episode, and last episode, I'm going to choose Timbo Piri. Hopefully I got it right, Timbo. And Timbo said, "I wish I had people to share this with, but no one will watch. But this is all true." And so, Timbo, what I have to say is, first off, thank you for watching. I do appreciate it. And second off, as you continue to improve yourself and work towards bettering your life and the way that you're operating in the world, just know that you're going to attract those people and slowly remove the ones who aren't interested in self-improvement, in living our best lives, and you're going to attract the people who are. And so hold on, keep improving, and get after it. Thanks, Timbo. And yeah, just leave a comment down below if you'd like to be shouted out on the next episode. Also, if you could leave a like and subscribe to the channel, I would really appreciate it. Now, without further ado, the episode.
Yeah, and not trying to be like super philosophical, but then you begin to ask yourself that question of like, is this who I really am? Like, right. How do I find myself? And like, does this reflect what I really believe in? And you go down a rabbit hole of that. And I think that's kind of the journey I'm on now of like, okay, I'm starting to figure out who I am, but there's still bits and pieces that need to come into play that truly reflect that, right? And when you kind of figure those pieces out, it's easier to understand how you want to live and what you want to do.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, I definitely believe in some things, but, that shows up in my daily life.
Yeah. No, I like that. Finding yourself is hard.
Yeah.
And I think it definitely is accelerated by looking at yourself while you're sitting in front of a screen.
Yeah.
Whether it's editing or if it's taking Snapchats, and going through your Instagram feed.
Yeah.
It's
the algorithm of every day, like social media, like I do have TikTok. I didn't jump on it right away. Like obviously TikTok was around for a long time before I actually got into it. And then when I first got into it, my whole feed, I did it mainly for puppies. Right. Like that was the thing that got me into it and kept me coming back to it, was like I would get on there and the algorithm would be like all puppies and stuff. So I'd be like, this is a kind of a nice escape when you do it right. And then as you kind of like different things and you like funnier stuff and different things show up, now it starts to become a lot of different things. And the puppy dog videos are a little bit less and less. Like they're here and there, but there's all this other stuff. So now it's like, okay, your personality is changing as you go along. And it's like you're looking at all the things that you seem to be interested in.
Right.
And that's why it's dangerous, because you're seeing a lot of different things and you don't know what's going to show up.
Right. It's all new and you don't know how you're actually reacting to it, because I don't know about you, when I pick up my screen, I feel like I'm in a little box and the rest of the world disappears.
Yeah.
You know? Especially when I get into that scrolling.
Yep.
Like, the rest of the world disappears and I could be sitting here for an hour.
Yep.
Most of the time it's longer than that.
Mm-hmm.
When I really get into that box. And I sit here and I look at my phone and I'm like, oh. And then it like takes a second to like readjust, but like our brains get so like fixated on this little screen.
Yeah.
And we're taking pictures of ourselves and looking at other people all the time.
Oh, I agree.
And it's so bizarre.
Well, yeah, I agree. I think it's definitely what you said. It's an escape. Because, like, I'll take today, for example. There was a long time where I would sit on my phone, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like it's not because I'm trying to avoid anything. It's just, like, I'm bored, right? Like, this is what I do. It's an escape. Like, it entertains me because I don't have anything else. Yeah. And we get into that habit. And that, along with, like, I don't know if you've ever heard of the phenomenon of, like, you put your phone on, like, vibrate or whatever, and it's in your pocket, and then you're walking around, and you're like, oh, I thought I heard it vibrate, and then you pick it up and look at it, but nothing's actually there, right?
Yeah.
I don't know what the correct term for it is.
I think it's it's just false alarms.
Yeah.
Like I think it's just false alarms.
But my phone is super obnoxious, so at one point a few months ago I turned that off, so it was completely silent. But in retrospect, now, because it's on silent, I don't know if I'm getting phone calls or I don't know if I'm getting text messages. So I find myself constantly flipping it over to look because I'm like, I don't know if I missed something. So it's just a habit for me to now take my phone out all the time and always look at it, even though I might not want to, because I'm like, it's silent, so I don't know if I'm getting anything or missing a call, right? Yeah. So I've just gotten into this habit. So it's like just being careful with your notifications and your screen time and everything that's incorporated with it.
Yeah. No, I find that with myself too. Because I've really like eliminated a lot of notifications.
Yeah.
And I've really tried to be super intentional with how I'm using technology. Mm-hmm. Still working it out. I still am not great on it.
Definitely a work in progress.
It is. And I find that the more notifications that I silence, the more I'm checking my phone for those things. Like, I'll check Instagram because I don't have Instagram notifications on. Yeah. I'll check Instagram a lot. I'll check Facebook a lot. You know, it's like I check these apps. Those are actually the only two apps I have anymore. Yeah, because I got rid of Snapchat. Because that was like the primary driver for me going on it. So I'm like, I have to be done with it. Yeah. I can text people I care about. I can talk to them. Hopefully I call them, right? Yeah. I find that like I FaceTime people more. Mm-hmm. Not an absurd amount of time because I am very busy, but I do feel that my relationships are becoming more intentional. Yep. It's very nice to go see those people, but for like the little things, like the little like dopamine hits that you get from seeing a cool Instagram post and stuff, I'm like, I'm searching for that more because now maybe it's because I'm not getting that dopamine hit from the notification. And so now my brain is like, and I truly feel like it's a compulsion. Yeah, you know, it's not
just a natural like.
Right.
It's a habit. We just form because we do it over and over for so long.
Right.
It's almost as similar as brushing your teeth or putting other habits in. Like you just naturally, you wake up in the morning, you naturally look at your phone, whether it's for the time or whatever. I mean, I still do that. I wake up, or I hear an alarm, and I'm like, all right, what time is it? And I naturally check my phone. And the other thing about it is now with iPhones, like they have raise to wake, so you don't even have to press a button. Like you just flip the thing over and it turns on, and it's like, yep, you know it's there. And I think with Snapchat, as you get older, I think it sort of becomes more intentional. At least that's how I've seen it. Because I remember being in high school and originally having it like right around when it was first becoming popular. And a majority of the time it was a lot of like people sending streaks to each other and snapping an absurd amount of people that you may or may not stay in touch with for another 4 or 5 years. And that was what it is. And now I do. I use Snapchat a lot, but I feel like the people that I talk to on Snapchat now the list has changed. And the people that I stay in contact with every day are my closest friends, right? Mm-hmm. And so I feel like as you age, you sort of grow out of that intention of I'm just going to Snapchat whoever I want, and now I want to stay in contact with the right people. And I think if it's managed that way, I think it's okay. But I think it's easy to tread that line and just kind of Snapchat everybody all at once. And that's where social media gets difficult, is knowing when to manage it and knowing when to cut people off if you have to, and knowing your boundaries with it too.
What are some boundaries that you find most helpful with social media?
Social media, I definitely just think about professionalism and just who you're portraying yourself to be, right? So when it comes to Facebook, Instagram, any social media, I definitely don't put myself out there, like post things about myself or post things nearly as much as I used to. And I think part of that is just professionalism of, this is my job and this is who I'm now associated with. And those people are on my feeds, right? So they will see everything and it's a direct reflection of who I am. So I think to myself, like, do I want these people seeing this? And what would these people think if they saw this, right? And so I think that plays a big role in it, of like, if I posted this picture, who's going to see this? And what's their mindset of me going to be? And now having the label of a professional counselor, it's like, you're posting pictures of, and I mean, you obviously want to have fun. You obviously want to live your life. But when you post pictures that, some people might not think is appropriate, whether you think it is or not, they start to question, like, does this person really deserve to be a professional counselor? And, like, they question some things like that. So you think to yourself, who would see this? And you ask yourself, and I feel like that helps me a lot, just looking out for what I've worked hard for, and that I want to keep that boundary there. And I'm definitely okay if, like, other people post things of me, depending on what it is, like, if some of my coworkers do, I think if they think the same way, right, they have that same mindset, it's okay. But just knowing and keeping that boundary of, I want to make sure my professional identity is still intact. And, like, I think it's okay to post personal things because it shows vulnerability, but still I try to avoid a lot of opinions. I try to avoid a lot of political stuff. I just try to avoid a lot of conflict, right? And try to really think about who's going to see this and what are they going to say about it, right? Because there's so many people out there, and there's so many ways they can take it, and so many people that can take a message and interpret it the wrong way. And then it blows up, and now you're in this fire of, like, now my professional identity's at stake. And I think at that point it becomes much easier to say, I just don't need to post this. So,
what do you think about people having two different accounts? I know that in a professional realm is very common. People have two different accounts, or people will take the exact opposite. I've seen that where people are just like, nah, this is who I am, this is what I do. And so you might have, well, for example, like the Prime Minister of Finland. I don't know if you heard about her or not. I mean, she got in trouble for the partying stuff.
Yep.
And so what do you say about like two different accounts or?
Again, I think we talked about it, but it's like, are you portraying yourself in two different ways? And do you have two different identities going on, right? Like, it's hard to determine at that point, depending on where the accounts go and how they take off and how much you invest in them, which one of those identities do you feel is more close to your true self. And so I feel like at that point it becomes hard to manage, because you're like, okay, in one account I'm this person and I'm portrayed this way, but in a whole nother account I'm this totally different person, even if they're similar. And it's like you still have differences there, and you're like, okay, now these people see me one way, but these people see me another way. So I feel like at some point it becomes a little bit stressful to manage, because maybe you have different beliefs on different accounts if they're for different things, So I've never managed multiple accounts. I think I guess it depends. I mean, obviously there's different hobbies. Like, I've always wanted to make an Instagram account for my dog. Like, I feel like that's not that bad.
I mean, she's cute enough.
Yeah,
that's
right?
for sure.
Like, and I feel
adorable.
like if it's pictures of a dog and, you never really know. I mean, you can kind of narrow it down to who's posting that, but there's never a picture of you on there, right? And there's never anything you're doing. And it's pictures of a dog, like it's completely harmless. I feel like at that point it's pretty simple to manage, but like if you're, or like a shopping account, you know, I see people post a lot of like selling clothes online. I think that's a good idea. I've always thought that's like a good thing, like if you have extra clothes or if you find cheap clothes somewhere and want to donate them and you're able to, I think that's a good idea too. But if you're, you know, posting maybe inappropriate stuff or like, I don't know, controversial stuff.
Yeah, almost like I don't know if it's still a thing, but the Finsta pages.
Yeah. And so for that, I feel like it gets a little more difficult because I've heard so many like stories and see so many articles about this mom is not allowed to go to her son's football games because she works this job but she does this, right? And the parents don't want her there because she's a bad influence, right? And so I feel like at that point it's hard because you want to stand up for what you believe in, and if that's what you want to do, go ahead, do what makes you happy, right? But if it's causing this much controversy, it's like that's where it gets hard to manage, I feel like, and it gets stressful.
Yeah, you're balancing, you're unable to be genuine.
Yeah.
And so you're balancing these 2, 3, 4, 5 different personas. And then I call into question too, where's your worth? Where's your sense of worth? Is it outside of you? Is it on social media then? Yeah. Because you want to make sure that you're portrayed in this way that makes you look, you know, how you want to for this population.
Yeah.
And it's like, I have to call into question, like, well, one, your sanity for wanting to run that many different accounts, because that's complicated. That's, you know, and then two, it's like, how you doing? You know?
And I think you call into question, like, is my presence worth more on social media or in real life?
Yeah.
Right? Like, you can build a following on social media. That's not a question. I mean, I look at some of the numbers on people's YouTube accounts, even I'm like 100 million people. That's so many, right? That's a third of the country, right?
Yeah.
And so you have this unbelievably enormous presence here, but then you take a look back and you're like, what is my presence like in real life? And how many people that know me in real life would say I'm the same person? And is that what you're trying to be? Are you trying to be the same person in real life as you are online? And I guess I've never really been, like I said, I've taken a step back as far as like posting stuff on social media, but I feel like I've always wanted my social media presence to kind of reflect who I am as a person, because I feel like it's just easier that way. You're not trying to run a different personality, a different life, if you're the same person on the outside as you are on the inside, right? So
yeah, it's much simpler. It's much closer to who you are, and so you don't have to try and manage these lines of thought. Yeah, 100%. That makes sense. I think, I don't know. I wonder why we escape, why we want to dive in to this social media world. But before that, before we get carried away, I want to introduce you. So tell everybody watching who you are, give a brief rundown of what you're currently doing, stuff like that.
Yeah, so I'm Jonathan Bressler. I'm a child therapist at the Kids Therapy Center. I'm an LAPC, which is a licensed associate professional counselor. I graduated with my master's in mental health counseling from the University of Mary about 6 months ago. So I've started to kind of get into that role and really started to dive into my career and my focus on mental health and doing a lot of different things like that. I think mental health has taken me to places I could have never dreamed of, especially, you know, with my career going forward, with the job I'm currently at, and understanding myself in a much deeper way. Just knowing how mental health works and what's required to take care of yourself and how important it's become. And so I see myself now, especially as a male, as this big, major advocate, because it's a hard position to be in, not only to be a male in the mental health field, but to also understand what it takes and the courage it takes to have those beliefs and be willing to share them. And I think that's something we'll touch on today, is growing up in a world where mental health is something that males are not taught necessarily to tend to as much, right? And so I feel like my position on that is very important, and that's kind of what's driven me a lot. So.
Perfect. Yeah, and I've known JJ for, 4 or 5 years now? Something like that?
I mean, freshman, sophomore year at college, just kind of ended up in psychology together and been inseparable.
Rest is history.
Yeah, inseparable ever since.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, so he's been an unending presence in my life since, so it's great to have you on. Thank you for agreeing to come talk to me.
Well, thank you. I mean, I've seen your other podcasts, and I thought, man, it's an honor. It's an honor that I'm in the finally part of the podcast.
Yeah. Well, hopefully we can bring you on again sometime, because I know we're gonna have a great conversation.
Yeah.
So back to escaping. Why do you think we can maybe bring this focus into men? Why do you think men want to escape reality? Because this is a question that I've been struggling with a lot. I've contemplated doing research on it. I've contemplated even writing a book on it. It's been something that I've been thinking about intensely for the better half of 3 years. And so I can't quite put my finger on it. I think I have a few good ideas, but I want to know why.
So for me, I think there's a couple different things. And I think the biggest one being we want to escape reality. And it's as simple as it sounds, that we as men experience as men were put into that traditional role of, I don't know whether it's blue collar, white collar, whatever it is, we are taught from a young age that our role is to provide. And our role is to not show weakness. And our role is, despite what happens to us mentally, physically, we're taught that we have to provide for our family and those around us. And that if we have issues, we have to figure them out. And we don't have a lot of support systems to do that. And so when those things tend to arise, that escape from reality essentially is what helps us, right? It's that, okay, I maybe feel like I'm angry right now. I feel like I have these feelings, but I don't know how to deal with them. So along comes this escape from reality, whether it's social media, drugs, alcohol, other things, whatever you want to call it, that's our escape, because we're not taught from a young age how we can properly attune to those mental health, those physical health ailments, and those things, because we try to go for help and we're told, we're not supposed to show that weakness. So I think that's a big thing. And another one I think is, like I said, that stigma of not wanting to show that weakness, and the traditional 40-hour work week and just stuff like that. And I also think comparison. And I think as men, we are naturally, as human beings in general, men and women, we're naturally competitive, right? We're naturally driven to do our best. We're driven to compete with each other and driven to support one another as well. But as men, we look at, we're working these 40-hour weeks, we're trying to make money, support our family, but we also want things, right? We want to be better. We want to be this certain type of person. And so in that escape from reality, we see what our life could look like. And we see, people driving yachts, people living in mansions, and we think, what do I have to do to achieve that lifestyle? And we start losing ourselves in, okay, I need to immerse myself in so many different things and so many different comparisons in order to think of myself as whole, to think of myself and properly have this self-esteem, right? Like I have to work this 40-hour week, and I have to make $85,000, $90,000 a year, or I'm not worth it, right? And we lose ourselves to that. And we forget to think to ourselves, and tell ourselves, I am worth it whether I make $90,000 or $30,000 a year, because of the qualities that I have as a husband, as a father, as a provider. Like, we tend to lose some of those qualities because we feel like either some of our needs aren't met, or we're not reassured enough, or we're not given the proper attention or the proper reassurance. Because I know that's something I struggle with, is sometimes I have a lot of anxiety over, am I doing a good job? Am I doing my job right? Am I a good person? Because I'm not told that a lot, right? As men, we're not told, hey, I really think, you're doing a good job. You're really important to us. Like, I care about you. Simple things like that. Like, it sounds kind of cheesy coming from a male, right?
Yeah.
But I feel like it goes a long way. I mean, I had yesterday morning, in fact, I just casually was walking out to go to lunch, and I had a coworker tell me, you're one of my favorite people. I don't know if I ever told you that. And it was just really subtle, but to me, like, it really struck me. And I looked at her and I was like, I don't get that a lot. Right? Like, I don't get a lot of those compliments, and I don't get a lot of that kind of attention. So it really struck me because it's like, not only does that reassure me that I'm doing a good job around here and that I'm, like, welcomed, but it also gives me that confidence and that energy that I'm living a life that I feel is worth it, and I'm doing the right things. And I don't need to begin to compare myself to people that are higher above me, people that are doing much different things, right? Because I know the people that are around me appreciate me for who I am, right? And so it's very simple comments like that. And I feel like, as simple as it sounds, a lot of it is missed, or a lot of it is overlooked. And we don't take those compliments and think, wow, this really changed, you know? Because I feel like men often starve for that kind of attention. I guess from my perspective, I feel like I see a lot of people who will take one of those compliments and ride it to the ends of the earth. Because I know that's kind of what I do.
Yeah, I think that's why a lot of guys compliment each other so well. You know, there's the common trope that men are more attracted to each other than they are their partners. Like their heterosexual partners. You know, because heterosexual men are, you know, some of the gayest men on the planet when it comes to their best friends. And I think, some of that does come from that need for attention. Mm-hmm. My question is, have we always been that way? And I don't know the answer. I can kind of speculate that maybe we are designed to not give that attention because, you know, maybe we were off to go die in battle. Yeah. You know, maybe that's how we've been wired over, you know, the centuries and millennia, that in order for us to be able to do that, our levels of affection need to be lower. That general, like, I don't want to go fight because I'm gonna put a hole in my community. Is, you know, in the back of my mind, and so then I'm not gonna go fight. But now we've reached a spot where we're really, at this point in time, I'm not sure what the future holds, that we don't need to go fight. That we don't need to worry about filling a hole in that community because we're going to be there, and so we're going to be more invested. But we haven't collectively figured out what that means for the men who aren't going off to fight. You know, and so it's like, okay, are we having to fill them with affection now? You know, because it seems like men left unbridled.
Am I weak because I didn't do this? And because I'm maybe seen as weak now, I need that. Am I undeserving of it, right? And I feel like it's unique. Like, as from my professional perspective, I like to think and I always think every single person is unique, and every single person has a different upbringing. And so a lot of that influences it, right? Like how we're raised, how we're nurtured, you know, our environment, all these different things kind of play a role in how well we take and receive how well we give and receive compliments, and how well we are taught to provide or understand who we are, right? And so I feel like, and incorporating trauma with that, and different setbacks and things like that, and mental illness and all of that changes that level of, you know, I'm taught to provide versus it's okay if I'm not providing, right? And knowing that at the end of the day, if I'm taking care of myself, I know that that's the best thing for me. Because I think that's the hard question is, if I'm not working, if I'm not because I have a broken leg, or if I'm not working because I can't find a job, but at the end of the day I'm taking care of myself in some way, is that okay? Right? Am I looked at as respectable and a good person because I'm taking care of myself and doing what I need to do? And I feel like you can ask that question for men and women, because that's what mental health is at the end of the day, is, am I happy right now? Am I doing what's best for me? And sometimes that question can be controversial, because sometimes what's best for you ends up upsetting people, or breaking relationships, or causing rifts in some way, shape, or form. And so I think that's what makes mental health very hard, is knowing making that decision at the end of the day will make you happy, but it might affect somebody else negatively.
So it's long-term benefit for short-term perceived selfishness.
It's looking at the bigger picture, for sure. It's in the moment, you might hurt somebody else.
Yeah.
But further down the road, years to come, months to come, you know you'll be in a better place because you made that decision for yourself. And then I feel like that's where boundaries come in, because it's like you have to be able to tell yourself either I'm okay with this or I'm not okay with this, and being willing to communicate that.
Yeah, I forget who said it. I think it was Kierkegaard who said, whether you do something or don't do something, I'm gonna get it wrong. Whether you do something or don't do something, you'll regret either.
Yeah.
You know, and it's basically just deciding what regret you're okay with.
Yeah, and you're either way, you're left wondering, right?
Right.
Like, whether I make this decision or this one, was this the right decision or was this the wrong decision? There's always going to be what ifs, right?
Yeah.
And there's a sign in my office that, I mean, you can apply it to some things, but I feel like for other situations it does matter more. But it says, ask yourself, will this matter a year from now? And I feel like for some small picture things, you can apply that. For maybe financial situations and different things, it's a little harder to apply. Like, obviously, you don't want to spend $1,000 on certain things if you need that money, right? So it might matter, but for littler things, you know, asking yourself, is worrying about this really going to matter in a year?
Yeah.
You know, and so I feel like that's helped me a lot. And then another thing that my brother actually has been telling me is, you know, the big question is, what would you do if you knew you couldn't fail, right? And if you looked at the world as a possibility, as a world of endless possibilities, right? A world where failure isn't an option. Like, you can do whatever you want. And you don't look at failure as this endless terminal of depression, right? You look at failure as a lesson. You look at failure as a stepping stone to what you're trying to do. It gives you that confidence and that ability to know and to do things more lively, right? To live your life and say, I want to take these chances because I can't fail. Because failure in my eyes is learning to accept that and learning to move on and keep doing things.
In some sense, the only failure is death.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. That's the only failure, and
right.
You're dead, so what else do you know?
Yeah.
You know, and so, no, that's fair. It's kind of loving what you do because, yeah, you can't fail. It's just a different path in the road. It's just a different, you know, outcome than you were expecting.
Yeah.
You know? That's good. I like that. I think not as many people hear that as maybe they should.
Yeah, and I think it's just been, for me, that's what I want to get a tattoo of, is the word confidence. Because I feel like that's been one of... I in high school, I had a basketball coach who, you know, his big thing was taking a word every year and working on that one word and what that word represents, right? And so last year was confidence, right? So I took confidence for a really long time and worked on that. This year it's been boundaries. And so I feel like taking that one word, what it represents to you, and learning to use it in the appropriate ways is a huge stepping stone of what you can change in your life and how you can learn to develop into the person you want to be. And so this year for me, yeah, it's been boundaries and saying, like, thinking to myself at times, you know, if I'm uncomfortable with something, being okay with saying no, right? And being okay with saying, okay, this is my boundary. Like, I want to be myself in this position and knowing this is okay, right?
Yeah. What has been your biggest struggle with boundaries? Is it the selfishness?
A little bit of that, and it's overlooking them and missing them, right? Like, letting things happen before you can even think about it.
Right.
And just, you know, accepting things before it's too late, and then also questioning if it's appropriate sometimes. Because that's where boundaries get hard, right? Because you add in things like fear of missing out and being there for other people. And things like, I'm sure, you know, with you being, you know, married and stuff, you're like, okay, maybe your wife does things for you and, you know, takes care of you, so then on a different day you need to go support her doing something, right? Like, you need to be there for her because you just feel like it's appropriate. So at that time, maybe it gets difficult because it's like, okay, I definitely don't feel comfortable doing this. Maybe I should put a boundary down. But then again, you're thinking, okay, now I have to be there, right? Like, I would just come off as selfish more or less because she's done all of this for me and I'm not willing to help her. So I feel like in those kinds of situations, or more or less for me, it's like a lot of my friends live in Williston, right? So if they come up to Bismarck a lot, 3-4 times every few months, and I'm never willing to go there. So then one weekend they ask me to go there, and it's like, oh, but I've been out and about every weekend for the last 6 weeks, right? I just need a weekend to sit down to do nothing. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that sounds like a good spot to set a boundary, but then you ask yourself, wait, they've done this for me, so I should definitely be willing to do that for them. Mm. And now you see that difficulty of, what is it going to look like when I set that boundary?
Right.
Like, who am I coming off as when I do that?
Yeah.
So I think that's when it gets difficult, is, understanding that gray area of, I want to set boundaries, but I also don't want to come off as selfish, right? Mm-hmm. So you really have to ask yourself, like, how is this, are the people in my life going to understand?
Yeah.
And know that that's what's best for me, right?
Yeah, it's determining how your reciprocity is being upheld. Are you in the relationship? Are you being equal? Is the relationship equal? Are they giving more? And so when you set boundaries, that calls it into question because, well, now you don't know because you're putting something new where maybe you're a giver. Maybe you're a guy who is just very open and giving and, every time someone says, hey, I need some help, you're there. Yeah. And now you're saying, I'm putting myself, whether it's in a financial struggle, whether it's in personal struggle, marital struggle, I'm a kind of guy who just says yes to things and then tries to figure out how it works later.
Yeah.
And that gets me in trouble, especially being married, especially in a marriage, because you have another person.
Yeah.
And so I've had to set boundaries up.
Yeah.
And it's like, I feel like I'm being selfish. I feel like I'm not even selfish. I feel like I'm being just downright rude. Mm-hmm. And maybe it's the Midwest in me. I don't know. Yeah. But it's very, very rude in my mind when I don't help someone, when I say no to someone.
Yeah. And I don't want to paint this in the wrong way either, but I feel like sometimes you see these traditional American stories of a man or a woman comes home from a long work day and wants to sit down and have a beer, right? Mm-hmm. You can paint it as this, he's not a good caregiver because he sits down and doesn't help with things at home, is one side of it. And that's where we see is this him setting a boundary of trying to take care of himself first before he helps? Or is this him being selfish because he's doing this and not helping? And so you can take it two different ways, right? You can say, and it varies a lot. I mean, everybody is unique,
Right, because it calls into question the intention.
Yeah. And so it's
what is he intending?
Yeah, and so it's is this a routine? Does he come home, have one every night, right? Mm-hmm. He does this to unwind for 15, 20 minutes, then he's up and being a father. Right. And do people hear that part of it? Do they take it out of context, right? Do they hear, oh, well, he just comes home and drinks every night. That's the only thing they hear, right? They don't hear he comes home and drinks for 15 minutes because he works intensely all day long, and then he's being a father the rest of the time, right? Or, which part of that do they choose to hear? And that's what makes it difficult, is that kind of portrayal and those kinds of boundaries are taken so out of context. In any situation, it doesn't have to be, in marriage where somebody comes home after working a long day. It can be anything. It can be, oh, he didn't choose to go out to eat with us after we spent all day golfing because, he had other things going on or because he didn't feel like it. Maybe there was something different going on. Maybe he couldn't afford it. Maybe he had to attend to something else, right? It's a lot of times it's taken out of context.
Yeah. Well, that's the fundamental attribution error. Mm-hmm. That's attributing a negative situation to the person's character rather than the situation. Yeah. And I 100% agree. I'm planning on doing an episode about this in just another couple episodes, but it's figuring out how to not say, well, he's just an ass, he just comes home every night and drinks, and you hear that and you're like, well, he's just selfish, not he's been working 65 hours.
Yeah.
It's 95 degrees out, and he's a construction worker.
Yeah, and taking, childcare into perspective, whatever else is going on at home, it's like he needs 15 or 20 minutes, right? And like I said, it can be taken in so many different ways, because it can be true. Maybe he comes home and drinks for 2 or 3 hours. At that point, maybe it's a whole different discussion, right? But if it is 15 to 20 minutes, how are we looking at that, right? Are we looking at that as, oh, that's selfish? Are we looking at it as, that's what he's doing to take care of himself for that? Maybe that's the only 15 or 20 minutes he has to himself all day long, right? Because we know from the lectures on self-care, from the lectures on the things we talk about with boundaries, the things we talk about in men's mental health in general, 15 to 20 minutes is not enough. I feel like in my daily life, self-care needs to be a minimum of an hour. Maybe it needs to be 2 hours, because there's so much that goes on throughout the day and so many things you go through physically and emotionally that you need that time to yourself. And you need that time to think about and process what happened that day. And you need that time to understand, like, these are the things I need to get done, but I also need to take care of myself, because that's how you keep going, right? And I tell this to younger kids too. I mean, I'm an adolescent counselor, and I teach my kids, you have a stress cup. I teach this to parents too. You have a stress cup, and if you let this stress cup fill up all the way and you don't take care of yourself, the littlest things are going to make you blow up, and it makes you come off as this inconsiderate or impatient person, when in all reality you're just stressed out, right? And so we look back at this self-care, and it's like, we need this 1 to 2 hours, because that's what takes this cup and winds it down for us, so that we're not looking at a broken toy or a broken chair and totally losing our minds because of it, right?
Henry David Thoreau would spend, he said, for every hour I spend in the company of others, I need X amount of time alone. And I think that we need to stress that sometimes solitude is a very good thing. We think of, especially now, we might conflate solitude as isolation, but in fact they're different. Isolation is unintentional time alone, where solitude is intentional time alone to learn about yourself. And we don't have that. We don't have that built into the day, because you wake up at 6 in the morning, you go to work, you leave at 7, you start at 7:30, you get, depending on your commute, and then you work 8-9 hours, and then you come home, then you're supposed to cook dinner and hang out with kids if you have kids, or hang out with friends if you're single, and at the time you finish, it's 8:30, 9 o'clock, and you wake up at 6, and so to get a decent amount of sleep, you want to start winding down by then, and then the only time that you have is time to spend on your phone. To catch up, on the recent happenings of the day. And so
that comes back to the escape from reality. Right.
And so then you want to escape rather than spend intentional time alone.
And then comes the comparison too.
And then comes the comparison.
I'm doing all of this, now I'm on my phone, now I'm seeing how much better of a life somebody else is living, and thinking to myself, why can't that be me? And forgetting that this is a good life, right? There's nothing wrong with having...
It's the only life you get.
And there's nothing wrong with it either. There's nothing wrong with doing that work and providing like that. There's nothing wrong with it, right? But it's in that escape that we forget that that's okay. Right? And we forget to take care of ourselves too, and we think, I can't handle this kind of lifestyle. And we struggle with it, we fight with it, and we're like, how can I change this? And I hear that... Have you ever heard that saying of, I'm all peopled out?
Yes.
So I feel like I hear that a lot, where it's like...
Especially from introverts.
For sure. I hear that, because it's like, I mean, you have a certain amount of energy that you put towards other people, and that socialness. And I feel like I tend to get that sometimes more on the level of social anxiety. And I think mine are definitely for larger crowds. I can be in a room full of people, doesn't bother me, but I go to like a concert, or I go out or something. When there's a larger group of people, it's definitely more difficult for me, because I feel like there's more people looking at me, and you get that that unnecessary, like, I wonder who's watching me right now, right?
Yeah.
And who's looking at me the wrong way, right? So you get some of that. And so I feel like it's definitely true. It's like you can only take so much of being out with other people because it takes your energy away to think about that so much.
Yeah,
right?
Go.
Oh, no, you're good.
Okay. So tell me what you think about this idea, because I haven't actually talked to this idea. It's been something I've thought about. So when you're spending time with other people, you're constantly being compared, right? In your mind, you're constantly evaluating. Your brain's constantly working to try and figure this person out because, well, we're all unique. And so every person we encounter is a novel stimuli. And so we don't really know what's in front of us. We're trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
Especially when we're in conversation, because it's, well, if I push this much, how much are you going to pull back, and how much are you going to push, and what are your boundaries? Where do you not want to go in a conversation? And so you're constantly being pushed against and pushing against this, we could just call it psychic energy.
Yep.
Right? You have this energy that you're pushing and pulling against, and your brain's not able to take the time to reflect because it's constantly trying to figure this person out. So you're not able to derive conscious energy to that person. And so you're being pushed and pressed against, and that's especially true in relationship to others, but even tasks, right? We're pushing against a task. And so the only time that you're actually able to not be pressed against other energies is when you're alone, when you're spending time in solitude and just being, just being there, present in the moment with yourself. And I think, some people might say, well, social media, that's, I kind of just mind-numbingly scroll. You're still being pressed. Even though they're not present with you, it's still a task you're still being pressed against. And you're trying to evaluate what's going on. And so if you think about kind of your energy and knowledge as a spool, a spool of thread, you kind of pull it out. It's being pulled out. Other people pull it out. And as you go about your day, you get pulled out, and then on that spool you have bits of knowledge and stuff and things that come out that you kind of throw out there, and when you're by yourself you're able to roll that up. But I don't think that at any point in and I hate using the term, but the average person isn't spending time to roll back up their spool of thread with all their bits of knowledge, because when you get back up and then you kind of see that idea that you threw out there, and then you can say, well, actually that's not as great as I thought it was, so I can throw it away, or I can kind of tweak it a little bit and then roll it back up. You don't actually ever get to roll back up your thread until you spend time alone with yourself.
And that is exactly how I view trauma. Because, and that kind of leads into, I think we'll talk about it, but the way I think of trauma is in terms of what we'll talk about, which is brain spotting. But I don't know if you've ever heard this phenomenon before, but the way I always explain it to not only my kids, but also parents and whoever kind of asks questions about it is kind of like you said. So take, for example, a polar bear, right? A polar bear is running in the Arctic or wherever polar bears are. I don't know geography and animals and all that.
Yeah,
so.
Arctic. I don't think they're in Antarctica.
Yeah, I don't know. Anyways, is running and is being poached or is being hunted down by poachers, right? So it's essentially tranquilized or shot, right? A polar bear is shot in the neck or in the leg or whatever. The polar bear falls down and starts shaking or almost having a seizure kind of. But it's not actually a seizure. It's the polar bear essentially processing what just happened. The polar bear, you look at it and it's shaking. It shakes for 30 to 45 seconds. I haven't seen the video in a long time. It might be longer. But then it gets up and walks away. And that essentially is the polar bear processing the traumatic incident of what just happened. That polar bear was shot. As human beings, we can't do that. right? We're not able to sit in a traumatic moment and pause and process it and move on. In a traumatic moment, in whatever life brings to us, something happens and we're taught to keep going without processing it, right? So this moment becomes trapped. Like what you were saying, we're taught that we have to keep going and we can't roll up our spool, and so we throw things out, right? Even though we might not want to.
Right.
That's how brain spotting works. Is these moments become trapped. These traumatic incidences, we're not able to shake it out like a polar bear does. It's trapped in our brain. It becomes something that stays with us, and it becomes something that we may have to process later. And so this idea of brain spotting brings those things to light. And it does exactly what you say. It's us being alone with those thoughts and processing it in such a way that at times is uncomfortable, but it's us alone processing what happened.
Yeah.
And understanding, what happened that day, and going back to that age we encountered something, and being able to do essentially what the polar bear is doing and shake it out. Because that's the only way to get through trauma, is to think about it and process it, right?
Right.
Because we can't just go on avoiding it. Like, we have to confront it at some point, or else it doesn't get itself taken care of, right? And so that's kind of what brain spotting is essentially what you said, is those moments where we think we need to throw things away or roll up that spool. It's us being alone with our thoughts, and it's us having that reflective time to really immerse ourselves in exactly what's going on, and also connecting our brain to our body and learning how those traumatic memories make us feel. And I think the biggest thing about it is it doesn't have to be trauma either.
Yeah.
It can be anything, right? I think a majority of the brain spotting clients I have don't usually use trauma as their reason for doing it. Some have anxiety, some just need confidence, some just want to talk about different things, right? It can be used for anything at all.
Yeah.
And it's really just diving deeper into who you are and what triggers you and what kind of brings about that anxiety or brings about that issue, and learning to become comfortable with it. Because I think mental health in general is something that we can't always cure, right? Like, we obviously have medication, we have things that help, but that doesn't essentially take away the problem. It helps us live with it. And that's how I view mental health, is we don't necessarily, anxiety doesn't just go away. Depression doesn't just go away, right? We learn to live with it, and we learn to make the best of it, right?
Right.
And so that's kind of what brain spotting is too, is learning to become comfortable with our anxiety and learning to live the best life we can. While anxiety is still there and it will be there at times, it's learning to rise above it, right? It's learning that I am bigger than my anxieties.
Yeah.
And it may affect me at times, but I know that right now I have the confidence to overcome it. Because it might not ever go away, but I know I can't live my life without understanding how to get better.
So we've talked about brain spotting a little bit, and you've kind of explained it to me, but I've only just learned about it because you told me that you were being trained in it.
Yeah.
And so from a technical standpoint, because you gave a great conception of what brain spotting is, but can you give a technical overview of what brain spotting is and kind of what it does for a person?
Yeah. So like I said, it can be used for a lot of different things. But the main idea is to access a spot in your visual field. And it's a very simple action, I feel like, but it opens up a lot of different things. So it's using a pointer to access a spot in your visual field that activates a part of your brain in which that trauma is brought forward. So like I said, when we talk about things that are trapped in our brain, we find that spot in our visual field and it brings that trauma forward, and we begin to open it up. I always say that it's like opening up a can of worms, because that's kind of what it is.
Yeah.
We're sitting in that trauma and we're discussing things that are oftentimes uncomfortable. And I tell my clients after I'm done, there's about 3 to 7 days where you might feel uncomfortable, like, because it's still happening, like it's still there. And so you need some time to wind down from it. And that's why I encourage self-care too, because while this is ongoing, you need to make sure you're taking care of yourself. And so it's a way of bringing that stuff forward and learning to become comfortable with it, and learning to work through those triggers and the things, and recalling those past memories and figuring out what about that triggers us now, and what about that gives us anxiety, and learning to cope with it.
Yeah. What about scanning? Because there's another popular trauma, visual trauma, processing-based therapy, EMDR.
Yep, EMDR.
Which is what? Eye movement, rapid desensitization.
Yeah, so EMDR is eye movement desensitization something. I don't know why I can't think of it.
Yeah,
I'm a professional counselor. I can't even think of it's eye movement desensitization reprocessing.
There you go.
That's what the saying is.
Yeah. So what is the difference between EMDR and Brainspotting?
Yeah, so I won't speak too much on it just because I haven't been trained in EMDR.
Mm-hmm.
But I know there are pros and cons to both.
Mm-hmm.
So definitely use whatever is more beneficial to you, obviously. The main thing that I see the difference in is just the pace. When I've seen examples of EMDR and seeing how it works, I know that it's a lot more fast-paced. And self-disclosure, I'm doing EMDR in my own therapy, right? So I'm beginning to see the process of how it takes a lot of pros and cons too, and you're kind of debating your core beliefs against things that you might be able to work against, right? So you're kind of going back and forth on that. Whereas Brainspotting is one simple, you're looking at one type of activation, and that's how we usually gauge. The Brainspotting is you pick a certain issue, whether it's being in a car accident or getting bullied, and you say, okay, what's your level of activation? How does this make you feel on a scale of 1 to 10? With 1 being, that doesn't activate me very much, I'm very relaxed, versus 10 being this gives me major anxiety, and it really triggers me, and it's very uncomfortable. And that's kind of how we gauge, okay, where is the situation? Is it a 4 or a 5, or is it a 7 or an 8 or a 9? And we try to gauge that. We work on that one subject, and we see where it takes us and how it makes our body feel. And we try to kind of ground that out and get us to that 1 or 2 level, and seeing how we can work towards that, and how when we encounter it again, will it bring us to that activation level of 7, 8, 9, or will we experience this calmness, that 1 or 2, and being comfortable with it. So,
one of the ways that you described Brainspotting was that it was not that you come in thinking about a particular thing. It's kind of whatever gets brought up.
Yeah.
And so if I came into you and was talking and we were going through this Brainspotting thing, it's not that I'm coming in to work on this trauma. It's coming that I'm scanning my visual field.
Yeah.
Right? And then I rest on a point, and then whatever is going on there, whatever that comes in, that's what you work on.
Yeah, and that's the wonderful thing that I think is so unique about Brainspotting, and I tell each of my clients this, is you don't have to do the same thing every week. You can work on one issue 1 week, and whether it's comfortable, uncomfortable, however you feel about it at the end, you can come back the next week and do something completely different. You don't have to do the same thing. It's all about learning to become comfortable with your different anxieties, your different things that you're processing, right? So it can be something different every week, and just learning to become comfortable with those things. And I think, like you explained, it's something that we learn to bring forward, and we learn that along that line something else could be activating, because you coming along different spots in our visual field we might not even know about. We could be talking about, like I said, severe trauma if we want, but along the line maybe we scan our visual field and we experience something that's not related to the trauma, but it's still activating in a different way. And we begin to have these thoughts of okay, this is unrelated, but it's still activating me. So I'm wondering what I need to process through with that. And we begin to realize about ourselves there are more things going on and more things I need to process. And that's the unique thing about, okay, maybe this happened this week, but I'm not ready to process that yet. So let's go to something else and work on that until I feel like I'm ready to go on to these bigger things.
Yeah. So it's almost kind of whatever you want to bring in, and maybe building up to those big things.
Yeah.
Do you know the neuroscience behind it? Because you said it with our visual processing, it connects with that trauma or whatever that we were experiencing, whether it's confidence issues, self-esteem, whatever. It connects with that, and then it allows us to do like the polar bear does and shakes it off. And so, do you understand how that works at all?
Not entirely. The main thing I know is that it brings that trauma that we trap, that we're not able to process, to our prefrontal cortex.
Gotcha.
And so it brings it to a present moment that we're able to process here now. And it takes it, from our hippocampus where our memories are stored.
Yep.
And brings it to our prefrontal cortex where we're now beginning to process. Because that's where processing is done, right? So when it's back here, it's not necessarily something we're thinking about. But when it's in our prefrontal cortex, that's when we begin processing. So in order for that to happen, that's why we scan that visual field.
Yeah.
Is to bring that forward, right?
Yeah. So it's going in the filing cabinet, picking
it's
out a file.
Finding something and learning to bring it forward and work on it, right?
Yep.
And that's what gets difficult, is learning to sit in that uncomfortability too, because a lot of those things that you work on is like, it goes along with the stigma of mental health. It's like, are you willing to be uncomfortable? Are you willing to talk about things that you might not want to talk about?
Right.
And are you willing to, admit that these things are bothering you? So.
Yeah. What has been kind of the progress you've seen clients make that do brain spotting versus ones that maybe don't?
Yeah, so it's definitely, like I said, every person is unique, and in therapy, I've begun to look at progress not as much as a short-term thing, but more of a long-term, right?
Yeah, because we're kind of told that, like, hey, especially I think this is mostly an insurance thing.
Yeah.
That it's like, hey, you have 10 sessions,
right?
Yeah,
and
bi-weekly. It's like 10 sessions bi-weekly, so 20 total weeks. It's like, figure it out.
Yeah, and in like traditional EAP programs, you're given 10 sessions as if gauging mental health. You can go from 0 to hero in 10 sessions, right?
Right.
But that goes back to every person is unique, and one person could take 3 sessions to go from 0 to hero versus another person could take 300.
Right.
So it really depends on who you are. But I think the way that I measure healing is self-confidence. And, obviously I talk to parents and I see, how are they doing outside of here? That's what's hard about, therapy and mental health is, as a counselor, you get to see a kid or a client for 45 minutes, maybe an hour at most, out of 1 week, versus they go out into the real world for every other hour of every day.
Right.
So it's hard for you to give them those skills, to give them that healing for that amount of time, and then either expect them to take it and learn it and automatically turn it into improvement, versus, taking that every week and learning to use it, right? So sometimes that progress can be hard. And like I said, every kid and every person is unique, so sometimes that adaptability happens right away. Versus others, it takes a little bit more encouragement and it takes a little more time, and sometimes different reinforcers too. Different things that happen to them to make them realize, wow, maybe I should really start working on this, or practicing it for a long period of time, right? And knowing like, wow, this is something I should really start focusing on. Right. So I think as far as brain spotting goes, kind of going back to our original conversation with that, it definitely varies depending on what the issue is. Some people definitely come in with more severe stuff, and definitely come in with a lot more, you see a lot more emotion, and you see a lot more difficulty sitting in the actual activation, because there's so much more that's back there that they need to process through. Versus some people are kind of on the lower side, where they're like, they have anxiety or they have different things that are going on, and they just use it as this, they kind of want to see what triggers that, right? And we want to see how it makes our body feel. And just, it takes some sessions to be able to recognize that, to recognize what makes us uncomfortable. So then we begin working on it. Because that's what anxiety is, right? I mean, it's hard to understand what makes us uncomfortable, because it's like, you ask somebody, why do you have anxiety? I don't know, right?
Right.
That's what it is.
Yeah.
We don't know. It's just we overthink. It keeps us from doing things we want to do, and that's kind of what Brainspotting does. Is it helps us with that insight of, this is kind of what's going on, and this is maybe why I have some of that, and pinpointing those ideas.
Yeah. It all comes back to systematic desensitization, right? It comes back to, again, pulling that file out.
Yep. And learning to become comfortable with it. Yeah.
Right. That's what all trauma work is. That's what any issue is, really, is pulling it out, looking at it and say, all right, yeah, okay, it wasn't as bad as I thought. Or maybe, that was pretty bad. That was actually really bad. But I'm here.
Yeah.
And that's kind of been a lot of what I've noticed that therapy is, right? It's all desensitization, of some sort. It's a desensitization of core beliefs. It's a desensitization towards desensitization and reprocessing of core beliefs. A desensitization towards, anxiety-provoking stimuli.
Yep.
It's, building resilience.
That was my next thing was a lot of resilience and promoting that resilience and understanding when it comes to trauma, you're still here, right? Like, you have gone through all of this, but now look at what you've gone through and the fact that you're still here.
Yeah.
And kind of learning to take that and use it as motivation and say, I've been through all of this so I can get through whatever comes my way. Sometimes that takes a long time to understand, especially when additional things continue to happen, right? So it's something that I've learned to understand too. Is resilience is a big part of it, and that goes along with the self-confidence and knowing our worth and all those other things that mental health is instilled with. So.
Yeah, well, I mean, resilience at a base level is one of the best predictors of longevity, right? How resilient our body is to change and enduring change long term.
Yeah.
That's why chronic stress is so terrible. That's why chronic inflammation, because it's putting our body in a continual state and really deteriorating everything, and we're not able to resist that. Because trauma causes chronic inflammation.
Yeah.
And so we're not able to resist that. And so when we can bring down, because our cortisol is going, and our cortisol is going because, we think that we're in danger.
It's that fight or flight.
Right, right. And so our cortisol's up because we think we're in danger because we haven't learned how to properly regulate and understand that we've made it through this, so we can make it through another thing, and we can make it through another thing, and we can choose how we react rather than be reacted upon.
And that's, that was one of the most important, and I think one of the most important pieces of information I received during my education was, when it comes to coping skills and regulation, if you're in fight or flight, throw it all out the window. That was exactly the quote that I heard from one of my educators. I said, well, if somebody is already escalated, if somebody's climbed the ladder and they are triggered by whatever, it's a trauma or just angry or exhibiting an intense amount of emotion, how do you get them out of it? And she said, throw it all out the window. You can't, once somebody's in that fight or flight, they have to do it on their own. They have to be able to find that regulation. And so I always talk about that with the people I see, and I'm like, you have to learn that self-awareness. You have to learn to identify, okay, this is what triggers me. These are the things that I should either avoid or learn to work through so that they don't trigger me anymore. Because once our hypothalamus is essentially activated and we're in this fight or flight mode, throw all those coping skills out the window.
Right, because that's cognitive. That's frontal cortex.
Because you either A, will not remember those coping skills, or B, will try to instill those coping skills and they will not do anything. Because you are so focused on what's going on and so activated that it doesn't help you at that point, right? So it's learning to say, okay, I'm about to go, say there was, a car accident, like I said, it's kind of the one I like to go back to, and you're now getting ready to go drive to school or something like that, or somebody's picking you up to go to school. Now you begin to tell yourself, okay, before I get in the car, what do I need to do to regulate myself? Versus if we're not thinking about that, then we get in the car and now that activation's starting to come. Now we don't know what to do. Now throw all our coping skills out the window because I'm already activated and I don't know what to do. So it's kind of identifying, okay, these are the things that stress me out and this is how I need to learn to regulate it. And this is how I need to learn to either find an alternate route to this or learn to become comfortable with this and learn to promote that positive self-talk and tell myself that it's going to be okay and be reassured in that way.
Yeah. It sounds like, and this is what I struggle with external control way of thinking, like external locus of control, external theories, systems theories. I struggle with that because they view the world as happening upon you. You're being pressed upon. You could think about it like the psychic energy that I was talking about. You're constantly being pressed upon by systems. And what I struggle with is everything that you just mentioned constitutes the action of the individual alone. It's not a system. It's not a community that comes around the individual. Sure, that helps, right? That helps to have a support system. That helps to have people around you who are going to help you. But what it comes down to is the individual choosing whether or not they're going to confront the stimuli or actively avoid the stimuli. If it's, I would say if it's something that can't really be controlled.
And that's where our anxiety comes in.
Right.
It's because anxiety essentially is what we can't control, right?
Right.
And it's
or what we perceive we can't control.
What we think we can't control,
Right.
right? And so it's like, okay, if I can't control this, now how am I going to make sure I'm okay? So now I'm overthinking it, and I have this anxiety because something's going to happen here, and I don't know what it's going to be, and I can't control this outcome. Versus the things we can control of, if I'm driving the car, I can control how safe I am, because I can control how fast I'm going. I can control if I'm wearing a seatbelt. I can control if there's other people in the car.
Right.
So it's like, okay, now we have a lot more control over our situation, so the anxiety is pulled back a little bit. Versus if somebody else is driving, and we have this trauma, we have this trigger, it's like, I have no control over if they decide to veer off the road because they see a deer. I have no control over if they catch a Pokemon in the wild. I don't know. So it's like, I have no control over that, right? So now I'm in this like state of essentially panic or that activation because my life is in their hands because they're the ones driving.
Right.
So now all the control that I thought I had is passed to this other person.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I struggle personally, like, having other people drive.
Yeah.
There's very few people, like two, that I can be okay with driving. Otherwise, I am through the roof.
Yeah.
And I never really, like, I've always been kind of like that, but it definitely was an accident that I was involved in. We were on a hunting trip, and we rolled. Yeah. We took a sharp corner, and we rolled. Yeah. And it's like, I don't know, I didn't feel anything, none of us were hurt, none of us, died, but I think after that point, I had that. And so that's something that I just brought forward from the files, that I'm like, oh man, that's a kind of a thing. Yeah. And I've been working through how I can, and I did the exact process that you did, right? Yeah. Okay, I can control how I'm driving. I know that I'm going to react a certain way if this happens. I know. But when somebody else is driving, it's all out the window. Yep. Because I don't perceive that I can control that. When, in fact, I chose to get in the car. Yep. I chose to get in the car, so actually I can control that. Yeah.
So you pull it back to that, what can I control, right? And
right.
what decisions do I need to make there?
Right. It's like, I could have not drove with them. And
I'm the same way. I mean, whoever's watching this, vouch, I am a terrible driver. I have not, I've
never rode with you.
Personally, I am disclosing right now. I have not. I think I know a lot of people in my life, and I've ridden and driven with a lot of people in my life, and I don't think I've heard a single person have a positive review on my driving. So with that in mind, just know I'm a terrible driver.
So no Uber in the future.
Probably not. I'm not a very good driver. That's all I've heard. Personally, I think I'm okay, but maybe it's self-bias. I don't know, but I think the same way you do, because a lot of, I think when it comes to driving in particular, I got pulled over in 2021? Yeah, so not 6-7 months ago February, but the February before. Mm-hmm. And, I never liked getting pulled over, because that goes back to, you can't control that, right? You can't control, that cop has all the power.
Yeah,
right?
Once you get pulled over, you can't control it.
So, even if it's for something simple like a taillight or speeding, that cop could choose to arrest you if he wanted to. Right. I mean, it might not be right at the end of the day, but he can still do it. Right. He has that power, right? Yeah. And so with that in mind, that did happen to me at one point. Like, I had to get out of the car, right? And I was just freaking out. Mm-hmm. Because it's that same idea that is what triggers me, is as soon as I feel like I'm getting in trouble, or I feel like I have so much to lose because of how hard I've worked for my career and things like that, it triggers me. Because it's like, I can't put in the emotional regulation of this is going to be okay, because I don't know. I can't control that. Only the cop can, right? So as soon as I'm sitting there trying to evaluate, okay, what did I do wrong? What do I need to do? Blah, blah, blah. He's telling me get out of the car. So essentially it's like, I'm immediately thinking to myself, okay, now what's he going to do? And I don't know.
Mm.
I don't know what he's going to do. He could take me to jail. He could tell me to leave. Like, I don't know. And all that anxiety is activating me and forcing me to panic because I'm trying to regulate myself or trying to work through this when I don't know what's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And so I still do that. I mean, I'm serious. Cops drive behind me on the road and I grip the steering wheel and I'm like, please, for the love of whatever, just don't do it, right? Like, and I know I'm okay, right? Like, I know I have the right things in place. Like, there's nothing I can do, right? But it's still that trauma that you talk about. It's like, if this happens again, like, I'm going to go right back to that night of what happened there. And it's going to be that same idea. And, we talked about social media before and the betrayal of people and stuff like that. It's like, what's going to happen here? And how is this going to go? And what should I do? And so it's that same idea of we're taught these coping skills. We're taught all of these different things. But when you're put in a real world situation, unless you think of it beforehand, you can kind of throw it all out the window because in a real world situation, it's hard to know what's going to happen.
Right. I think I want to take what you said with the when I get out of the car,
Mm-hmm.
I can't control anything.
Yep.
I think that's true to an extent, but I do think that like we still need to remind ourselves that as long as I'm doing what I can do to preserve myself in that situation.
Yeah. And that's where it gets hard, right?
Right. Oh my God, it's hard.
Because it's like,
hard.
How do we tell ourselves that? Because immediately it's like, get out of the car. The first thing that comes to our mind is, oh shit.
Right?
Like,
it's like, I'm going to jail.
My life is over.
Yep.
Because the first thing that comes to our mind is not, okay, what do I control? What do I do? I know this is the process. This is how we're not thinking about that, right? We're thinking, oh shit, I have to get out of the car. I'm going to lose my license. Yep. I'm going to go to jail. Yep. Panic.
Yep.
And so that's where it gets hard because we don't remember to tell ourselves that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where that fight or flight comes in.
Right. So. Absolutely. It's one of the hardest things to do is remind yourself that you have control. Mm-hmm. But I think we have to do it so often that it becomes automatic or nearly automatic to where that's the first thing we go to. And I think that we've been told that things are out of our control.
Yep.
That, well, you really don't choose what friends you hang out with in high school, right? And to an extent you don't, but you do.
Yeah.
In college, you really, everything's kind of procured and curated for you, and you kind of, you don't really choose anything either. And your ideas, they aren't original. You don't come up with original ideas. Everything's already been thought of, and so you're just rethinking things in kind of a nuanced way. Yeah. And so everything is kind of predetermined. We get predeterministic, and so we fall into this cycle of, well, everything I do, it doesn't matter because it's already controlled. Well, the government, they're going to do whatever they want to do, and so I have no part of it. Yeah. People are going to do whatever they want to do, and it's like, that's them, and it's like there's nothing I can do.
Yeah,
and
that
sorry. You can no, keep going.
Just like for an example of that, it's like, well, I think about my paychecks every week, and I'm like, well, I'm gonna get paid a certain amount, but I know the government's gonna take a certain amount of it too, so I can't control that. And it's like I could panic about that, but I also know it's gonna happen. Like I can't do anything about it.
Even that, you could choose not to pay your taxes.
I could choose. You could change that. I could choose to
You could choose to do something about it, You could choose to give them more.
I can choose to commit tax fraud, right?
Exactly. You can choose. Yeah. There's a lot of choices that we make that I think that we outsource to just saying, well, I don't really make that choice. But when in fact you make 30,000 plus decisions a day.
Yep.
From waking up in the morning, to brushing your teeth, to spending money on Starbucks that maybe you didn't need. Or maybe you did need because you haven't had one in a while.
Yeah.
And you need one for a little upper, you know? You need a little boost. And so you're choosing to spend it on yourself because you're choosing to care for yourself. Yeah. And I think bringing this back to men's mental health is that often men in particular think that, well, I just have to go through life, having things chosen for me, having things like my outcomes are already decided.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't matter what I do, doesn't matter what I think, things are just going to happen, and I just have to be okay with it.
Yeah.
And that line of thinking leads to resentment.
Because it shows weakness.
Right.
Because I can't speak out for issues that I'm not comfortable with because
it shows weakness.
It shows weakness. It shows that I can't provide, or this isn't something that, this is something that I'm trying to go against.
Right. Or I'm not a nice guy.
Yeah.
I'm unreasonable. It shows that, because I'm putting my foot down for this reason.
Yeah.
When in fact, you are choosing to take a stance for what you think is best.
Yeah.
But you need, and just tying things together, you need solitude to do that.
Yeah.
To actually think through what it is you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
You need solitude. You need time alone.
Yeah.
And you need to sit with your own thoughts and think. Because we make 30,000 decisions a day. We have 100,000 stimuli come at us a day. And it's so much going on that we need to sit with that for 30 minutes, an hour, something,
And I think it, along with a million other things, it's a habit too. I mean, as far as boundary setting and stuff like that, for me, for anybody, it doesn't happen overnight.
No.
You can't, you can tell yourself you can stand up for yourself one time, but that's not going to make or break you, right? It has to be something that you're consistent with. Yeah. And I feel like for me, that's what I've had to do, is consistently make that call and make those decisions. And like you said, you have to be in that solitude and give yourself that time over and over and consistently to get into the habit of that, not only, and that reinforcing it, right? Of when you make those decisions, whether they're good or bad, you're kind of reinforced in that way, based on that outcome. How you feel afterwards. So, for me, I know a couple weeks ago, for example, I know I was supposed to go play golf in Washburn with a couple buddies. And I had golf the day before, so I told myself, I just really don't want to go. I don't want to go because I want to stay home for a day. I just don't want to do anything. And so after that had happened, I know the next day I felt better about myself because I felt like I had the $40 in my bank account, as if that makes a difference. No. But I was more rested for work. I was in a better mental state. And that by itself reinforces it, of knowing I know to make these decisions and set those boundaries because I know it makes me feel better. Right? And so it's that habit, not only, but also learning that it reinforces you. And so you being aware of, okay, if I go out and do these things and overextend myself, I know how it's going to make me feel later. So I know to pull back on that and avoid that because I know how that looks. And I've been reinforced and I've seen the outcome. And sometimes that's what it takes. It's the same thing as learning from our mistakes. It's like, well, I know not to make this decision again because look what happened last time, right? I know not to go 25 over the speed limit because I'm going to get a ticket, right? It's that same idea of I know not to do it because I know how I'm going to feel and I know what it's going to cost me. Taking mental health into example, it's the same thing. I know not to go here on this day because I know how I'm going to feel tomorrow.
Right. Well, that's wisdom, right? Wisdom is gained through learned experience.
Yeah.
And when we spend time alone, or even I think you can kind of consider therapy as a bit of solitude because it's talking mainly about yourself, but I really think that you need time just alone, just time spent by yourself. Because when you're able to spend time alone, you're able to see those consequences and you don't have to live them out.
Yeah.
You can go through them and say, yeah, man, if let's see, what else is on the agenda? Oh, I have to go there. I probably, let's see, I could speed. Well, I could speed and, well, then I'd have to probably go 25 over, and, I'd have to get there quick because I want to leave at this time. When you kind of order through your day, you structure that and you say, well, actually, maybe I just want to leave half an hour early. That I don't have to speed that much. And
it's evaluating, those decisions, right? And it's knowing don't be late.
Right.
Putting it into more simple terms, it's like, well, if I leave at this time, I have to go 25 over. So why don't I just leave earlier so I don't have to do that? And I think mental health can be described in sort of the same way of like,
Yeah.
well, I don't want to be stressed out tomorrow. Okay, I can play 9 holes of golf, and then maybe I have to do something else for self-care in order to make sure I'm not stressed out. Or I can just not go play golf, and then I know that I'm going to be well rested, and it's easier on me to then go about my day the next day.
Golf isn't restful for you? You aren't totally relaxed when playing golf?
I mean, as one of the, terrible golfers of society, I will say that it is one of those sports that brings out the worst in me, right?
Oh, man, yeah. Yeah.
I've gotten a lot better over the years, but I still think it is one of those sports that I'm so inconsistent at, where you're like, you have a great shot on the first shot, and you're like 150 yards from the green, you're like, I'm in a prime position, and then your second shot goes 20 yards sideways, and you're like, what just happened, right?
Yep.
And you kind of look at life the same way, right? Of that
100%.
Perspective of, wow, I'm cruising right now. My first shot, 150 yards, I'm doing good in life, and then something bad happens, right? Yeah. That was the whole theme of my summer last summer, was like, I battled with different things, and I would get on a roller coaster of positives and try to climb out of a hole, and then something bad would happen. And I'd be all the way back down, and I'd just get exhausted, because I'm like, I can't keep doing this. I just have to, what is going on? It gets frustrating, because you're trying to keep on top of yourself and everything that's going on. Then you get derailed by something you can't control, and it's like, eventually you get to that point of, you're kind of riding. You ever heard the saying where it's like, I don't want to be too happy in life, because that's when something bad happens? You ever heard that?
Yeah, I used to think that all the time. Yeah.
And it's essentially that. It's like, once you kind of experience life in that way, you kind of begin to have that mindset of like, okay, I'm kind of walking on eggshells, because things have been going pretty well for an extended period of time, so I'm kind of waiting for something bad to hit me. Mm-hmm. And it's like, you don't want to live life that way, because you don't want to expect bad things. You want to live and know that life is good, right? You want to embrace the good. But if we're constantly waiting for something bad to happen, we're not embracing that good. We're missing out on immersing ourselves in the life that we're living, right? Because we're constantly scared of, okay, what's going to happen next? Mm-hmm. And I feel like that was, like I said, the majority of what last summer was for me was like, yeah, these good things happen, but I know I'm going to experience something bad next, so I'm not even going to get excited for it, right?
Right.
And we fall into that cycle, and it's hard to get out of.
Yeah, we just self-defeat continually, and we just believe that for whatever reason, this bad thing is going to come. I think a lot of anxiety comes from, a lot of anxiety and a lot of depression comes from anticipating the bad things, not because the bad things are coming, because the good things are going away. We're not going to have those good moments anymore, and we're not going to be on that high. We're not going to be feeling good. And so those bad moments are going to come. Because life is suffering. Yeah. I think we all know that.
Yeah.
I think we all know that by now. Life sucks.
Yeah.
And it just comes up to you whether you're ready to embrace the suck.
Yeah.
Is a term I think I've heard before by, I think, Jocko Willink. I love listening to him. He's fun. It's like, are you going to embrace the suck? Or are you going to go, are you going to get after it? Or are you going to let life suck you up, basically?
And I think part of it is, we are more prone to mistakes when we are thinking about making mistakes.
Oh, yeah. Right? It's a self-fulfilling prophecy.
It's like, okay, I'm waiting to mess up something. So now you're a lot more likely to mess something up when you're thinking, how do I mess this up? Versus, well, if I mess up, life goes on. We're not really thinking about it. We're thinking more about, okay, how can I do this right? And honestly, that's kind of how I am when it comes to my social life and my relationships sometimes. Being self-disclosure, talking to women, right? It's like, okay, how can I possibly mess this up, right? How can I fear rejection, right? How am I going to get rejected in this time? If I say something, how is this going to go sideways? Versus, how can I become friends with this person? And how can we get on the right track? And how can we find common ground, right? I don't think about that. I think of, how is this going to look afterwards when I'm being shut down, right? That's that we get into that negative mindset, right? And it's hard to avoid, because we're naturally driven towards that failure and that that anxiety, that mental health thing we talk about, that anxiety of well, all of these things can go bad, so that outweighs the good, right?
Right. Yeah, it's how can I make myself look like such a fool? How can I go into this? I think, yeah, we worry about the social evaluation before it even comes.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what confidence is. Confidence is knowing that, because there's arrogance, which is not knowing the outcome. But then confidence is knowing that possibility exists, but doing it anyway.
Yep, that's what I tell my kids and my parents too. Confidence, in a nutshell, is I know that something is going to happen and I'll be okay whether it happens or not. Like, it's accepting I might not fit in with these people, or these people may or may not be in my life, but I'm okay either way.
Right.
It's knowing that these people may be important, but I'm more important. And like, it's knowing our worth, and it's knowing, okay, I know that I'm important, and if these people don't accept me, I'm okay with that. Mm-hmm. Not, I need to be accepted by these people, and not depending on that, right? That's how I view confidence. Mm-hmm. It's knowing you'll be okay if those people don't accept you, or if this doesn't go the way you want it to.
Mm-hmm. That's just wonderful. I love that. It's because so many people, when you get into this evaluation of on social media, evaluation of yourself against others, you lose that confidence because it's
that comparison.
Right.
The saying is, comparison is the thief of joy, and it's exactly that. It's we lose our self-confidence because we are comparing ourselves to somebody else because we essentially want to be that person, and we're losing that mindset of I'm okay being myself because we want to be somebody else.
Yeah.
And our confidence is going towards, I wish I could be this person instead.
Absolutely. What is some advice you would give to men struggling to seek mental health help?
Well, I think you and I both touched on it pretty well. It's knowing that it's in your best interest and looking at the bigger picture. Mm-hmm. And understanding, in the moment, you being vulnerable and showing that weakness, right? Knowing that it might be humiliating, maybe, embarrassing, maybe, yeah. Some people might make fun of you, but knowing that's okay. Mm-hmm. Because in that moment it might hurt, but in the long run, you're taking care of yourself. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times, I think of it as essentially kind of like going to the doctor, right? Mm-hmm. Like, if you're sick, if you have the flu, if you have whatever, you go to the doctor to get better, right? Mental health is the same way. Mm-hmm. If something's not right, if you feel like you want to fix something, you go to the therapist because that's how you work it out. It's a little bit different idea because you're not necessarily, taking your blood pressure and doing all that stuff. Mm-hmm. I'm not a physiologist by any means. Mm-hmm. But it's that same idea of, if you're sick, you go to the doctor. Mm-hmm. If you feel like something's going on, you go to the therapist, right? Mm-hmm. And I think the biggest thing is being able to show that humility, that weakness of, okay, I know this is something I want to work on. And I think also something that helps is surrounding yourself with the right people, because that's where the stigma comes from. I think a lot of people look at that peer pressure and they're like, okay, what is my friend group and what are the people around me going to think if I tell them this? And it's knowing that if I tell them this, they will support me. Mm-hmm. And they will take care of me, and they will ask me what's going on with this, and they will continue to support me. Versus if I tell people this, are they going to make fun of me? Are they going to abandon me? Are they going to think I'm weak? And asking yourself, on the other side of that, if that's what they're doing, are those the right people that I need to be with? Mm-hmm. And so it's just kind of taking control of your decisions that we talked about, and knowing that it's okay. Mm-hmm. And knowing that there's no downside to therapy, right? Like, it's a beneficial thing. Like, I don't want to be too inappropriate here, but they say, one of the sayings is like, when it comes to like, I don't know how the saying goes, but sex and pizza, right? Mm-hmm. Whether, even if it's really bad, it's still pretty good, right?
Yep.
Therapy and working out and some things are that same way. It's like, even if you have a difficult session, it was probably still beneficial. Right? Because you got something out of it. You probably learned something. You were called out on something, which I feel like I need a lot. You were given some sort of learning curve. Mm-hmm. You learned from a mistake, or you processed something important. Mm-hmm. I feel like a bad day in therapy is still a good day overall.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think learning that and knowing that you're taking that time to take care of yourself. And another big thing that I always say is getting there is half the battle.
Yeah.
Even more than that. Because for some people, that's the hardest part, is being vulnerable and being willing to put yourself in that position. Mm-hmm. And so for me, I feel like, as a piece of advice, yeah, if you get yourself in that position and are willing to be vulnerable, that's half the battle. Because sometimes even just talking about it helps. Yeah. Like, you might not need to be given ideas, advice, different routines. You might not just need to talk about it. You might just need to tell somebody, this is what's going on. Now somebody else can hear it. Mm-hmm. Because it's all stuck in our brain and it's stuck on our chest. You know the saying, like, I just needed to get that off my chest. It's essentially that. And now it's like a weight is lifted off our shoulders. And so I say, yeah, just getting there and being willing to be vulnerable is a huge part too.
Yeah, vulnerability is huge. I think a good way to think about it is like practice. Mm-hmm. It's practice for life.
Yep.
The one thing that maybe we should not approach just by trial by fire.
Yep. Well, and that's the beautiful thing about therapy, is it doesn't have to be you if it's not just you. You can do couples therapy. You can do family therapy.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a child therapist. Mm-hmm. And, you know, maybe we'll have to do another podcast on all the things I do there. But
yeah, that'd be wonderful.
I mean, the kids I see, all they do is play. They play with sand. They play with toys. They build Legos. It's like, those things essentially are their universal language of communication. Yeah. It's how they're processing what's going on. And it's building their self-confidence in a different way. Mm-hmm. And they might not think of it that way, because they're thinking, wow, I get to go play today. Mm-hmm. And you kind of think of it as an adult, and you're like, I just get to go talk to somebody. Mm-hmm. I get to go have a conversation. You know, you bring your cup of coffee in if you need to. I get to go have a conversation today. Mm-hmm. And I get to go, you know, talk about this, this, and this, just like I would talk to a coworker. Mm-hmm. You know, and it's when you get into that mindset of, like, it's okay. Doesn't have to be stigma to it. Mm-hmm. It doesn't have to be client, therapist. It can be two human beings, and eliminating that barrier. That's how relationships are built, is whether it's in therapy or in, sorry, I'm kind of rambling on.
No, you're good.
Whether it's in therapy or in any social setting, eliminating the idea of, well, you're better than me because you're this or that. It's seeing we're equals, mm-hmm. because we both do things this way. We both struggle with this. Universality, I always talk about.
Yes.
We all go through different things, but we go through them together.
Yes.
Right? Like, you're on a certain education path, I'm on another one, but we both struggle with algebra, right? Mm-hmm. Like, it's knowing that you're not alone doing the things that you do. So.
That's wonderful. I think that's a great place to stop.
Yeah. So.
Thank you for coming on.
Yeah.
I think we talked about a lot of great stuff.
Like I said, I was kind of rambling there at the end, but I appreciate you having me on and just being willing to share some stuff. And
yeah,
I'm overwhelmed by the podcast and everything. And since I saw the first episode, I was like, maybe one day I'll have my calling.
That one day came.
Well, like I said, I have a feeling this might not be our only episode.
I don't think it will be either. I really enjoyed this, and yeah, talking about kids and stuff. I think because as you were talking, there's so many questions that popped up.
There's so many things.
Like, man, kids, that'd be a great episode to go over. So
there's plenty more to dive into with that too. But for now, it's, we dive into those topics about men and mental health, and it's definitely an ongoing thing and something that always needs to be addressed. So
yeah, what is, final question, what is the number one, in your opinion, what is the number one thing that helps mental health? Help improve it.
Improving mental health, I definitely would say consistency. Just like any other routine, any other aspect of life, we practice. To get better at something, we have to practice. We want to get better at basketball, we got to shoot 100 free throws. We want to feel better from the flu, we got to take our medicine. We want to get stronger, we need to work out 2 or 3 times a week. We need that consistency. Mental health is the same way. We need to talk about it a certain number of times. We need to be going to our appointments every week. We need to be practicing our coping skills, practicing that regulation, setting those boundaries when they're necessary. That's one of the hard things with the kids I see is, I give you these skills, I give you these things to work on, are you doing it? you know, because I can give you all of this, but if you're not doing it outside of here, what good is it, right? It's that same idea. It's practicing and just getting consistent and learning that overall we might not see it right away, but just like any other thing, it doesn't necessarily happen overnight. We don't gain 50 pounds of muscle overnight, right? It's a long process. Mental health is the same way. And on top of that, final thing, keeping that consistency, right? Keeping that level of consistency as we go along, because we know we don't want to regress. We know that it took a certain level of consistency and effort to get there. Now we have to keep that effort. We have to continue doing that even though we know we're successful, because this is what it took to get there. This is what it's going to keep to sustain it. It's that saying, I think J.J. Watt said it, I don't know. But it's like, success is not like solid or it's not earned, it's rented and leases due every day. Same thing. Same exact thing. It's our mental health is there every single day, and we need to do the proper things to take care of it. And make it a habit, even when we're successful, even when we're happy. Even when we're our happiest, we need to still continue to do those things, because that's what got us there, and that's what keeps us there. So.
That's wonderful. Thank you.
Yep. I appreciate you having me on, sir.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Mandalorian Season 3.
I really hope you enjoyed that episode. Thank you so much for watching. Episodes are going to keep getting better and better, and so make sure you're subscribed to follow along, and make sure you don't miss any awesome episodes like this one or this one right here. Thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing all of you in the next episode.